Okay, we are live. Welcome, everyone. Today's session is slightly different to our normal sessions because today I'm joined by Bruno Aziza from Google. Hi, Bruno.
Hi, how are you?
I'm so good, so good. And Bruno and I basically have a plan. We are both people that have been in the tech industry for many years. Bruno worked for startups, for Microsoft, for Oracle, for Google now, and I have worked with many of the big tech companies, and we both keep an eye on some of all the developments that are happening around the world. And we thought, actually, wouldn't it be good to do a monthly roundup on some of the development, some of the hot topics, some of the main industry news? So this is the plan. We want to do a first session here, looking at some of the key news, some of the biggest trends in the industry, but we also want to involve all of you. So please engage with us. Let us know what you would like, because we have had some ideas of what we would cover. Things like, what have companies released? Are there any new products? Are there any new studies coming out? Is there new research? But also some of the fascinating books that we're reading, and so on. So, and we try to make this as interactive as possible. So, Bruno, anything to add?
Yeah, and I'm excited to be doing this with you, Bernard, because you're providing the perspective from across the world. I'm in Silicon Valley. I'm having coffee. It's, what, 8:30 my time, and I think you're having coffee. And what time is it for you? 5:30 or 6:30? What time is it?
It is 4:30 now.
4:30, okay. And so that's kind of the idea, is really kind of share what we're seeing. Every Monday I do my top 5 big data, AI, and analytics posts of the week to try to do a recap. And so we thought that we would do this on a monthly basis, but I think we want to hear from you in the community. What is it that's interesting to you, so we can cater this monthly meeting, if you will, for you, and then highlight the topics, the books, the news that's occurred over the last month, so we can have a conversation around it across the world.
Very good. Yeah, and Evans is just saying, good initiative. Thank you very much. This is what we want to hear. And we also would like you to add something into the chat. So if you say, actually, this month you should also talk about this and that, and you might have forgotten this topic. So if I was chatting to Bruno earlier, and this month so much has happened. We've seen I think database technology, cloud-based technology has come to the forefront. We've seen this with COVID, that cloud computing has been accelerated across the world. Companies realize that they need this, and we've seen this in some of the IPOs. So we have seen Snowflake and Palantir, both in 1 month, massive IPOs, and Snowflake is doing extremely well. We have seen the Apple Watch being released, the Apple Watch, the Apple Watch, and also the iPhone 12, which again just fast track some of this technology. We now have 5G, which is one of the big trends, and we've seen the artificial intelligence technology inbuilt into those phones, which also enable things like augmented reality. I think this is a massive push that Apple is going for. If you think about the LiDAR scanner in the latest iPhone 12 Pro, this is pretty impressive, and this will make augmented reality amazing, that you can actually project things into your room and have them correctly positioned in terms of size. We've seen big acquisitions as well. We've seen NVIDIA, the big chip manufacturer, and acquire ARM, the UK chip manufacturer. So again, companies have been in the AI space for a long time, trying to come together, which I think, especially looking at some of the competition they're facing from China, I think they want to become stronger. What else have we seen? The other thing that we've seen is that I love one of the technologies that Google has introduced. Actually, they've introduced a earthquake detection system, and basically using smartphones, so the Android smartphone network, because you have little sensors in your phone that detect motions. They're using artificial intelligence to detect that now lots of phones are detecting vibrations, and they can now use this as an earthquake detection system, which I find pretty amazing.
There's been a lot going on this month in the world of data and AI in general. And I think, I can't remember, I think it was Deloitte that came out with a survey that showed that, in this past year, the speed of digital transformation in the average organization has been, 10x essentially. I mean, a lot of it is the conditions that we're in, I think, where, people are looking for these experiences that we're living right now. You and I are remote, but on a daily basis, you're working remotely, particularly if you're in the tech industry, connecting with your family members. You're having to do this. So there's more and more technology on the consumer world that are coming to help us kind of emulate this human relationship that we've been missing for so many months. And so it's certainly you're seeing that through, I think, what companies that are in the consumer world are making available. You talked about Apple and NVIDIA, and I think they were talking about using some of the technology to make these types of meetings better, right? So that's where they're going to apply their AI efforts, is making the remote experience more and more human and a higher quality. And so I'm curious, though, if the people listening to us, what are they noticing in terms of digital transformation? How it is affecting their work on a daily basis? If one thing that we know, even though all these consumer companies are making this technology available, there's still a lot of failure in implementing and making AI available in production. There's certainly a lot of technology, there's a lot of excitement around it, but there's a high level of failure when it comes to deploying AI in the real world and making it operationally sound. So, it'll be interesting to see how these companies kind of make it easier for both consumers to consume AI and also for enterprises to deploy AI in a way that is effective long-term for their companies.
Yeah, this reminded me, actually, when you were talking about NVIDIA, that one of the products, or one of the ways they're using AI now, is pretty cool, because I guess when we do something what we're doing now here, video conferencing, the challenge is that most people's camera is somewhere different on a screen to where they're looking at. So I now have my camera in front of my screen, your face next to it, so it feels better. But actually, one of the things they're doing is they're using AI to augment your face. So even if you're looking here, the AI will then automatically position your face as if you're looking at me, which is pretty interesting. And it's also questionable whether is it really you that you're then speaking to, or is an augmented avatar of yourself? It's interesting.
It is interesting. I think, I've heard people, so I don't think there's research on that I've seen, but I have heard that one of the reasons for why these meetings are becoming more and more tiring is because of this lack of focus. In fact, what's happening is people are discovering that in these meetings, they're spending the entire meeting looking at themselves and talking to themselves, because they're so self-conscious of what they look like. And so actually, it might sound trivial, but having technology that allows you to actually just talk normally without having to worry too much about looking at the person, without being out of focus, might actually make the meeting more relaxing to you. And Absolutely. So I think that's actually a type of technology innovation that's going to make our daily life so much easier. I think people are complaining now that, working from home and they're doing these back-to-back meetings, you're missing the human interaction of walking from one meeting room to the next, and you're being a lot more self-conscious and self-aware of what you look like on camera, that it's making it more difficult, these meetings, and certainly more tiring, especially if you have the camera on all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was an interesting bit of research the other day where a boss basically asked all his employees to keep their cameras on all the time, so that he can keep an eye on them, so he knows that they're actually working.
I think, some of the companies that I've heard are asking for that. It's not so much because of that. It's just because they're trying to make sure that people feel great about seeing their colleagues, because it's true that if you do calls where you don't see anyone after days, it could make the experience very lonely. I'm curious of the people listening to us, what has been their experience? What's worked for them, right? Is it that some meetings you're just not going to have the camera, or you want the camera on all the time, or you're building breaks between your meetings that you are making not mandatory, but you're really asking your employees to make sure to take breaks, because it is, I think the bottom line though is taking those meetings remotely back to back could be pretty draining for employees overall.
Absolutely, which really brings me to one of the topics I want to talk about today, which is mental health. So
Yeah.
this week we've had World Mental Health Day, and I think mental health is a really it's a really important topic at the moment. I think people generally are anxious about the world at the moment. They're worried about the future. They're worried about not only catching the coronavirus, but also the economic impact, their jobs, and everything else, and then all the change in the work environment. It was interesting that there was a study done by the National Office for Statistics here in the UK, and they basically described it as the perfect storm that we're heading towards now, where we have more bad weather, more isolation, people feel lonely, increased coronavirus cases. So people are really scared. And what was interesting is I recently covered a bit of research that found that 85% of people, of 12,000 people they surveyed around the world, said that that they would much rather speak to an AI or to an AI enabled robot rather than a human being about their mental health problems. And I thought this is interesting. And for me, there's real scope using technology for this, because if you think about this, at the moment, there are big waiting lists. There's a big stigma related to mental health. People don't like to talk about it. So if you have the ability to speak to a robot, they can give you some advice. They can even provide some counseling. One of the books I'm currently working on that will come out next year is on augmented reality and virtual reality. And actually, one of the chapters I talk about is healthcare and the way that you can now diagnose certain mental health conditions using virtual reality. And then also having a virtual reality therapist that can take you into a completely different world and provide some training, which is interesting, I think.
Yeah, and there's an element, I think, there of psychological safety, in being able, as weird as it might sound, as being able to talk to a robot where it's safe. If you don't have that at work or at home, it could be helpful. I mean, certainly, I think what I've seen, I'll talk about a personal example. My mom lives in the south of France, beautiful environment. And, in France, there's a lot of this next week, I think they're going into more confinement. And even her, who has an environment that is pretty pleasant, she can walk down to the beach. It's fairly sunny in the south of France pretty much all year long. She's starting to be depressed about the prospect of when are we going to see each other again, right? Or, it doesn't seem like we're able to shake this pandemic off. And so she's even thinking, okay, will we be able to see each other in the summer? Will we be able to see each other at Thanksgiving next year? There's a lot of uncertainty. So it's already that it's bad currently, but also as you look forward, it doesn't seem like there's an end for a long time with this crisis. So people need a lot of help. What I've been doing is you talked about turning on camera. I call my mom every morning using Facebook Messenger so she could see my face. I can see her face. She can see my dog and so forth. So being able to recreate those human experiences, I think, is important. And then, of course, at work, if you have the luck of working for an employer who is really strong on providing psychological safety and the ability to enable employees to be vulnerable, having coffee breaks with colleagues or even people that are across your teams, it's certainly helpful. I've been telling my team, for many years now, there's an author who I love, is Brene Brown. I actually have 2 books. If people in the audience here are into books, I would tell them, take a look at this book here, Dare Greatly. It's a great book about, psychological safety and vulnerability. And then this one, Rising Strong, is another great book as well that I would recommend. But of course, it's one thing to be vulnerable yourself. You have to work as part of an organization and a group that accepts that as well, right? So vulnerability goes both ways. And that's probably why people are having to revert to robots because they're having a hard time being vulnerable themselves, because they might not have been taught that as they grew up, or they might not have been supported by an organization. And then there's also the environment around them. Do they feel that they're in an environment that's safe for them to do that? So, sadly enough, here in Silicon Valley, we don't talk much about using robots for this kind of use case. A lot of the stories that I've heard is robots are being used to deliver things and make interaction less human-like, so there's less transmission in the virus. And certainly in the area where I live, there aren't that many cases because there's a large tech employee so we can base, so we can all work from home, and everybody is very careful here. But I can see across the nation here, it's a big country in the US where it might not be like that everywhere. So you want to try and use robots to substitute to human interactions that would have been dangerous and could transmit the virus.
Yeah, and there's a good comment here from Aishiwara saying, can you talk about insights about COVID and their impact and its impact on technologies? And what I'm seeing very clearly is that the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation.
Yeah.
So cloud-based computing has enabled companies to work from home. I was working with a company earlier today, and basically they were as a call center company, and they were set up before to operate in big call centers, all office based, and within a few days they had to move to home-based computing, which meant they had to basically put their entire infrastructure onto the cloud to enable this. And this is something I'm seeing everywhere. So companies using cloud-based computing, and they're using AI and automation much more heavily. So when you talked about robots for deliveries, this is again something that I live in Milton Keynes here in the UK, and we have the Starship robots that deliver my grocery, and we've never used it more than during the pandemic, where we just didn't feel we wanted to go to our local shops, and having this delivered to your house without no human contact, all app-based, is pretty amazing. And I'm still amazed that these things drive by themselves.
Yeah.
Let me just have a look through this stream here again, just to say thank you so much for joining, by the way, everyone. There's Torsten from Leipzig in Germany. We have Timis from Bucharest. We have Galit from Tel Aviv. We have Vincente from Brazil. We have Ahmed from Egypt. We have got Edward from Austin in Texas. We have we've just talked about you from India. We have Monica from Colombia, from Seattle, Chrissy from Seattle. Really good to see you. We've got Dursun from Turkey, and Mahendra from Sheffield here in the UK. We've got someone from Switzerland. We have got Catherine from Washington. Got Naveen from Philadelphia. So it's really great. Catherine from South Africa. So thank you so much for saying hello. Omar from Oman, Andrew from Canada, and Dalton from South Africa. We've got Jean from France. So it's great.
Southwest of France. That's a pretty cool city.
Yeah, Toulouse is beautiful. So and we've got Ahmed from New York. So it's great. A completely multinational global stream as always. So, and in addition to saying hello, let us know what the kind of topics you want us to talk about. So we talked about mental health, we talked about robots. This actually reminds me of another story, that in the UK there was a university that tested robots in care homes, so in old people's homes, and because those people were feeling particularly lonely at the moment, because they're not getting as many visits from their families, they can't see them other than on video calls like you do with your mum. And what they were doing is they were issuing these robots, and they are basically companion robots that they can speak to, they can have a conversation with. And what was interesting is that lots of the elderly really love them. They said that they're developing a really relationship with them that makes them, it really helps them to have more conversations, which is really important. So I find this really interesting that I almost have two minds with all of it. I feel in on the one hand side, I feel I feel slightly freaked out by this idea of developing a relationship with a robot. Before the pandemic, what we used to do in our house here is we were involved in a little charity here that basically allowed that basically worked for lonely old people, and they would collect them and then drive them to people's houses, and then we would host them for an afternoon, early evening. So we would have 8 or 10 of them come to our house, and we would cook them, bake them some cake and give them some coffee and a glass of wine, and for them this was the highlight of the month. Really, they all got dressed up for it, and it was a great way for my kids actually to interact with old people that they don't really have in their life, and they could share some interesting stories. And I remember one of them talking about their Alexa and saying that, "Hey, do you have an Alexa?" So, "Yeah, I have an Alexa. Do you have one?" "Yeah, yeah." And then they were saying how they're having conversation with Alexa, and how they're saying good night to Alexa every night. And then Alexa would say, "Hi, good night, sleep well, sleep tight." And you think on the one hand side, this is great. On the other hand, I feel slightly worried that we're now replacing human touch with robots. And how do you feel about this, Bruno?
Well, I think there's a little bit of the good, the bad, the ugly of it. I think that the good is what you're saying, which is they're very useful. They can prevent the transmission of disease. Because they are unemotional and they don't have a bias into our story, they could be a safe place for people to use them for therapy, like you said. But the bad part of it, I think it changes the relationship we might have with other people, as well as the relationship we might have with our own self. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the things that scares me the most about these devices that you mentioned, the Alexa, is how it's changed the way we end up interacting with other people. Like, for instance, you rarely say thank you to your Alexa when she's giving you an answer to something, right? And those are trivial things, but if you interact with your intelligent device 100 times a day, it might be Siri, it might be Alexa, it might be another device, and you're getting information or you're getting a service from these devices, and you're forgetting to be thankful and you're forgetting to be human, over time, if you do that, after a few years, what is that doing to our kids? How are they interacting with these devices? Are they forgetting how to be human? And so I think that's something that we got to watch out for. I love what you're doing with your kids being able to connect with other generations and so forth. Remind me, there's a Netflix movie, I think, called She, I think, right? So where, the main character falls in love with the device, and the boundaries between what it means to be human and what it means to be a robot, are kind of blurred. And so I think we got to watch out for that. There's some use cases where it's very useful, but we got to monitor that and how far we're going into this, because it could really change the culture and society.
I had a very interesting discussion with Professor Marcus Dusautoy, who is is an Oxford professor on the future of science, and what our conversation was about: can machines be conscious? And his conclusion was, why not? There's no reason why they shouldn't. And if they can be conscious, it has interesting implications for what this means in the future. So I know that the European Commission currently has a task force that looks at whether robots should have rights in the future, which is very interesting.
That's an interesting concept. But before we close, I do want to give people access or highlight on a resource that helps us have better awareness of our society and our differences in culture. I know we have a very diverse community here listening to us across culture. This month, I came across this book called The Culture Map. And I highlighted in my LinkedIn profile. Got really popular. I always joke when I talk about the issue with communication is the illusion that it actually occurred. Across our cultures, we we talk and we think we've communicated effectively, but in fact, because of the differences of our society rules or how we grew up and how we, where we're from, kind of conditions, how we think about things, there's this book that basically takes 7 dimensions and breaks them up on explaining the differences between cultures. So I know, for instance, you're German and I'm French. And for instance, an example of differences for us would be what they call context. So the author, Erin Meyer, she talks about, well, the US and the German cultures are very low context societies. So what that means is they value precision and definition. So when you say something, you want to be precise. Whereas France and India and Japan are very high context, where we tend to work in a very blurry world where we tend to guess. We say very little and we try to communicate a lot. Whereas in the US, we say a lot to be very precise. And so if you're trying to move away from the robots and try to connect more with people across the globe and their culture, take a look at this book, take a look at that post. Hopefully I'll make you smile, and as you're interacting with fewer people, help you think about the differences across our cultures.
Very good. Yeah, and then as always, let us know what you think about these. This is the first one that we are running, and hopefully this will be a monthly recurring session where we talk about the latest developments, latest trends, and everything interesting in the tech industry and in the business industry. Let me just pull up here and Andrew's comment saying, any insights on AI and online education? So this is a topic I'm definitely very passionate about. I'm a governor in our local school where my kids go to. I'm also sitting on the Dean's Council for Lancaster University. So I've always kept a very close eye on education, and AI for me is a massive enabler. At the moment, I believe that our education system is pretty broken. That I still fear that we are educating our system like our kids like in the industrial age, where we just give them as much knowledge and information as we can, spoon feeding it to them in a class of 30, and then hope that a lot of this sinks in and we test them whether they have remembered those facts. And so for me, AI can play a real role in all of this, because actually a lot of this kind of learning can be done by AI. And just today, I've written an article on Duolingo and how they're using AI. And you've spoken about them recently, because there's a great case study of how we use AI for language learning. And I think a lot of those learnings from that case study that you can find on my Forbes page is now flowing into education, where you can use AI systems that will monitor how good people are at math, and where you then start to teach them, and then you identify shortcomings. So it's much more individualized. And then actually we can use schools much better for being creative spaces, where you focus on creativity, you make things, you focus on teamwork and getting people to work in groups, but developing some of the social skills. And for me, this is a bit like what companies are going through at this stage as well, because in the past, we just crammed everyone into offices and said, you need to be in the office to work. Nowadays, we have to have a reason to go to the office. And why can't we do this over Teams or Zoom or something else? And because people realize actually working from home works well, makes me very productive, and I go into the office for a particular reason, in the same way I go to school for a real reason. So for me, there's a really big opportunity. What do you think, Bruno?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, I have 2 kids, and my daughter's in college. She's on campus right now, but she is attending classes remotely, which is kind of interesting. And my son also is attending classes on a daily basis. And what I see is that we really have the opportunity to use AI and technology to make the learning experience a lot more personal, and get technology to help them learn how to learn more effectively. Right now, first of all, I think, just like you said, Bernard, the educational system in general is having a hard time modernizing itself for the new times, right? Because you're trying to educate for 10 years from now, not 10 years ago. So there's, it seems like it's really difficult to modernize fast enough. And then in the way we teach now, it's being challenged because now everything is remote. And so I hope that in the next year or so, we're going to take advantage of new technologies to, advance education, just like we're advancing the other topics because of this transformation, digital transformation that's required now for organizations to survive.
Very good. We said we would do this first session for half an hour. The time.
Yeah, we had a lot of topics, and we covered just a few, so we got a lot more that we could go for.
I know. Maybe we should do another one sooner than we thought. Everyone who's listening or is listening to this live or later on, let us know what you think. Did this work for you? Was this interesting? Is there anything else that you would do differently? As I said, this was our first little session. We thought we'd bring some interesting perspectives. Both of us are from different parts of the world, but we're all looking at the same industry, maybe from slightly different perspectives. So hopefully this was useful. And we feel, I've known Bruno now for the last 20 years, I think, and we bounce off each other really well. So hopefully this will go fantastically well in the future. Natalia saying, amazing guys, super interesting. Thank you very much. So that was great. So we will make this a regular feature, and from now on I will also announce the next sessions on my Twitter and LinkedIn, and Bruno will do the same, and then hopefully we will have regular slots.
All righty. Thanks, Bernard. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thank you, everyone.